As a queer, progressive Christian pastor, I can think of a lot of places that I could go to and not be welcomed. At one point in the Presbyterian Church USA, my denomination, my home denomination, another minister in the presbytery where I was serving at the time brought charges against me for disrupting the peace, unity, and purity of the church. Fortunately, I had dear friends, amazing legal advocates, and a whole community of queer activists who assured me that I should just put on my boxing gloves and get ready for the fight. Sometimes I wonder what I would have done if my community at the time suggested that I simply walk away from the Presbyterian Church and never look back and get on with my life. At issue, and the reason the charges were being brought against me, was the idea of having pastors who were queer actively serving in churches. The conservatives in the church couldn't live with the idea or the reality, and the progressives had been waiting for decades for it to become a reality. What the progressives, including me, kept trying to say to the conservatives was that queer pastors serving churches was not just about theology or ideology. It was about individual people and their lives and their calling. Every time there was a debate on the floor of Presbytery, somebody would stand up and say, "I just want to remind the assembly that we are not debating an issue. We are talking about human beings who happen to be sitting among us." We always hoped that reminder would soften the conversation a bit, but it never did. Every debate was horrible. As it turned out, the investigative committee assigned to investigate the charges against me was a mixed group theologically. After interviewing me and the one who brought the charges against me, they decided the charges were unfounded. I was not disturbing the peace, unity, or purity of the church. I stuck around, and look at me now. I lived to fight another day. But if I were to take Jesus' words literally, or even to heart, I would have left the denomination right after being brought up on charges. I would have shaken the dust off my feet and cursed everyone as I left. Don't you wonder why Jesus would have told the disciples to shake the dust off their feet as they leave any town that wouldn't welcome them, while at the same time preaching that we are to love our enemies and pray for those who would hurt us? The story that Sam read this morning from the Gospel of Mark is an account of Jesus getting ready to send the 12 disciples out in pairs to go and heal people and to invite people to change their hearts and their lives. Jesus' instructions are pretty simple. Don't take anything for the journey other than a walking stick. Don't take money, don't take bread, don't take bags. Don't even take extra clothes. Don't wear 2 shirts, just wear 1 shirt and wear your sandals. Don't go switching houses, but just stay put once you are invited in until you leave for the next place. And then Jesus said this: if a place doesn't welcome you or listen to you, as you leave, shake the dust off your feet as a witness against them. The other Gospels that came after Mark include a curse in here somewhere as well. To help us understand, it's important to know that one of the Jewish customs in those days was for pious Jews to shake the dust off their feet when they were leaving Gentile cities. They did it as a way to show that they were separating themselves from Gentile practices. It was like saying, "We're shaking you and any influence you might have over us off." So when Jesus instructed the 12 to shake the dust off their feet, he was flipping it around and having them shake the dust off their feet from the Jewish cities they were visiting as a way of saying they were separating themselves from the Jews who would not follow Jesus. What I find problematic about it is that it seems to have Jesus, at the very least, condoning a separation between differences. Shaking the dust off one's feet was seen as a way to manifest the power of being able to forgive or retain the sins of another. However you look at it, the act or even the metaphor of shaking the dust off one's feet is a direct action against someone who has been less than welcoming of people or ideas or practices or all of those. I've heard people joking who have said, "I shake the dust off my whole body" after that person said that. The problem is that we've reached a point in our country where we're not just shaking the dust off of our feet, but we are leaving people in the dust. And for what reason? As we've seen in the past year, one of the biggest reasons is our political differences. Our ideas are not their ideas, and vice versa. But how would we know? We have taken Jesus' instruction and put it on steroids. This is how it would sound today. If a person doesn't agree with you or align with you or believe the way you do, then treat that person as though they are dead and don't think about them again. Separate yourself from them in every way. Don't waste your time or breath or energy on anyone who disagrees with you. How does that mindset reflect living like Jesus lived? In the late 60s and early 70s, Carol Gilligan received her PhD from Harvard, and she had been working with Lawrence Kohlberg, who developed a popular theory of moral development. Gilligan was first his research assistant and then went on to do her own research. His moral development theory included 6 stages, the highest of which was when an individual develops a deeply held, self-defined set of moral principles that one tries to apply to all people equally. It was Kohlberg's belief that not every person would reach the highest stage. His research claimed that women scored at lower stages than men. So Gilligan's work set out to show the gender bias in Kohlberg's theory, since he only included young white males in his study. Gilligan argued that men are not morally superior to women, and that women's and girls' voices just haven't been included over time. After that, she decided she would study the moral development in women. What she discovered, surprise, surprise, is that women think about morality differently than men do. According to Kohlberg's theory, men look at morality through a lens of rights, laws, and universally applied principles. Think law and order. This so-called ethics of justice has been held up as an ideal because it's championed by men in patriarchal Western societies. According to Gilligan, women tend to look at morality through a lens of relationships, compassion, and responsibility to others. This so-called ethics of care has often been overlooked because women tend to hold limited positions of power in patriarchal Western cultures. Before we go much further, and we're going to go just a little further, it's necessary to point out the limitations in any gender-based study, because gender is far more than binary, and it's binary models that are used. It's also limited because of how many men don't fit the gender study results and how many women don't fit the gender study results. Having said that, I found it fascinating to read what Gilligan used as a test case. She used Kohlberg's Heinz dilemma to study the difference between boys and girls. Here's what she says about it. In this dilemma, a man named Heinz must choose whether or not to steal medicine he can't afford to save the life of his dying wife. The boy participant believes Heinz should take the medicine because the right to life is more important than the right to property, which in this case is medicine. On the other hand, the girl participant doesn't believe Heinz should take the medicine because it could land him in jail for stealing, leaving his wife alone when she most needs him. I think all of us can think of movies that have been written about this very dilemma. Remember, it was done more than 40 years ago. One of the conclusions drawn from this example is that an ethic of justice is impartial, and that means principles are applied in the same way, even if it means it negatively impacts the individual or someone they are close to. So, if an ethic of justice means believing life is more important than the medicine that could save that life, then the stealing of medicine is a choice one could make. An ethic of care is not applied in the same way across the board, depending on one's principles. Instead, an ethic of care is contextual. It considers the relationships one has, and in this case, the choices to care for the dying woman and not leave her alone, which means not risking jail time by stealing the medicine. The last couple of weeks, we've been talking about living by an ethic of care. If you want to be caring, practice care. What we're trying to do as people who follow Jesus is develop an ethic of care that covers the different ways of caring. This week, we're focusing on ideas. How do we care for ideas? My friend Alan, who preached here a few weeks ago, recently wrote about how we're not any more divided ideologically than we were 50 years ago. He writes this: the gap between what Americans believe is no wider than it was 40 to 50 years ago. Maybe that statistic surprises you as much as it did me. After all, we're more socially divided than we've ever been in the history of the United States, including the Civil War period. But sociologists who study polarization distinguish two different types. There's affective polarization, how we feel about each other across our different beliefs, and there's ideological polarization, how different our beliefs actually are. As a recent summary of this data puts it, many Americans hate each other more than ever, but they don't disagree with each other any more than they used to. Does that surprise you? I believe Alan got this information from a Wall Street Journal article talking about how social media makes us hate each other more than ever. If we don't disagree any more than we used to, meaning our ideas are no more divisive than they used to be, why do we hate each other so much more? Several years ago, I reconnected with the daughter of a family I was very close to at my first church out of seminary. She was in her early 30s and had 2 kids. I surmised over time by her posts that she might have married someone in law enforcement. Though some of her posts raised my eyebrows, I refrained from commenting, except for positive comments about how beautiful her kids are. Until one day. One day, she made fun of Christine Blasey Ford during her testimony that she was sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh. I was so shocked. I responded immediately. And the gist of it was, how could she as a woman make fun of any woman who is having to publicly tell a story of sexual assault? And why would she set an example like that for her kids? She responded angrily, and so I initiated a private conversation with her through messaging. The result was that she blocked me from her Instagram account, even after I had apologized for the way I had handled it. It's possible others have blocked me as well. Maybe some of you have blocked me. But if you have, I don't know it, so I'm blissfully ignorant. Part of the reason we hate each other more than we used to is that social media and email and texting have become ways that we communicate with each other that is distanced and does not require accountability. Email means that we can write and send something without ever thinking carefully about it. Social media and texting are the same way. When you write someone a letter by hand, you typically think about it as you write it, and you typically reread it before you send it. Countless letters have been thrown away over the centuries for having to be completed again. There are a couple of tools we can use to avoid becoming part of the hate club. Whenever you are writing something that will be sent by text, email, or social media, ask these two questions. Would I say this same thing in the same way to the same person or people if we were together in person in a room? Another question you can ask yourself is, how would I feel about receiving this or reading this if I were this other person or these other people? And then lastly, another question you can ask yourself is, am I feeling fear in some way? And if so, what is that fear? The idea is to get at what is causing this really strong reaction in me. If we can be clear about that, then we'll be a little clearer in our communication about it. If you're in such a hurry to send something that you can't take time to ask those questions, you probably shouldn't be sending it. If our ethic is one of justice, we're going to care about ideas from an objective standpoint in terms of how they contribute to the rights, laws, and universally applied principles that make up the law and order of a land. If our ethic is one of care, we go beyond particular ideas and place our effort into the keeping of relationships. The person who has the idea is more important to us than the idea itself. Maintaining relationship rather than cutting off relationship is our goal. Because an ethic of care means that context is always taken into consideration, we have to work much harder to understand the context and why someone would say or do what they have said or done. There is always a story. In the past 20 years in this country, we have become much more binary about ideas. An idea is either good or bad, right or wrong, racist or not, white supremacist or not, Christian or not, liberal or conservative, smart or stupid, kind or mean, and the list goes on and on and on. Instead of wondering about the context, we immediately categorize. Why are we unable to get curious about context anymore? We should be curious about why different family members might have voted for Trump, or why different congregation members might have. Instead, sometimes our response is to feel morally injured by their action. But often we don't know the whole story. What if we did know it? When I initiated conversation with the one who blocked me from Instagram, I did end up understanding her comment a little differently. I regretted that I hadn't asked her why she had said it before I jumped down her throat. She regretted having said it, but it wasn't nearly as nefarious as I had decided it was before ever talking to her. And that's how it seems to go these days. Jesus doesn't need a church full of people who are ready to shake the dust off their feet and leave all conversation behind with anyone who disagrees with us. We don't even all agree. Jesus needs a church full of people who recognize and believe that at the heart of Jesus' ministry was an ethic of care. Everything was contextual for Jesus, based on the people standing in front of him who needed to be fed, healed, restored, and brought back into community. We might not be a megachurch in size, but we can be a megachurch in our influence in the world. Will you commit to being stewards of ideas, which really means committing to caring for the people who have ideas, even if they are diametrically opposed to ours? But I can hear you asking right now, somewhere, some of you are at home saying this to the person listening with you. What about the people who believe children should be separated from their parents at the border and put into cages? I cannot and will not care for people whose ideas are so harmful. To which I would say, Jesus is asking us to care for those people too, because very few people actually think that way. And if we refuse to speak to those who do, how will we ever invite them into other possibilities? Being stewards, living by an ethic of care, is not going to be easy, ever. And as I've said before, Jesus never promised us easy. But Jesus does promise transformation, beginning with our own transformation and transformation of even those who disagree with us. May it be so. Amen.